It was the jazz age, and the Broadway stages were filled with big girly reviews and slick musical comedies. It was also the final gasp for American operetta. In fact, J.J. Schubert loved operettas and would go on producing and reviving them long after the vogue for operetta had passed. There is actually a legend that still exists that grew up around the many Schubert productions of the Blossom time that were crossing the country. It was rumored, even as late as 1950, that somewhere in the hinterlands, a production of Blossom time was still touring, as if lost in some operatic twilight zone. The success of Blossom time, which was based on the life of Franz Schubert, incidentally, that's S-C-H-U-B-E-R-T, as opposed to the brothers who called themselves S-H-U-B-E-R-T. The success of Blossom time led to the creation of the patriotic show My Maryland, which in turn led to the creation of the Student Prince by Sigmund Romberg and by the great librettist and lyricist Dorothy Donnelly. Now, during Blossom time's tryout, while Romberg was conducting the orchestra, J.J. Schubert wanted to know, quote, why the damn orchestra was playing so loud. He couldn't hear the words. Well, Romberg explained that only the fiddles were actually playing. J.J. told him to use only one fiddle. But during the creation of the Student Prince, even Lee Schubert got involved, because Lee only usually did the straight plays, but he decided to get involved and make his voice known in this one. The Student Prince was based on the play Old Heidelberg. And it kept to the plot of the play about a young prince who falls in love with a barmaid, but he's got to give up his love for the sake of duty and a royal marriage. I'm sure most of you know the story very well. The Schuberts owned the rights to the play. They didn't own the rights to make it into a musical. And the play had actually been done and produced by the Schuberts with the great actor Richard Mansfield, who played the young prince when he was nearly 50. Didn't really matter in those days. Everything was age appropriate, I guess. Dorothy Donnelly had seen his performance when she was a young girl, and she never forgot about it. Her libretto stayed pretty much to the original, including keeping the unhappy ending of the show, in which the boy did not get the girl. Now, this caused Romberg no end of problems with the Schuberts, because at one point the Schuberts were even adamant that there be a change to the ending of the show. But Romberg remained very adamant that there needed to be a bittersweet ending to the show. J.J. Schubert got into a screaming match with Romberg, ran through the theater saying, throw this man out of my theater before I kill him, and take his name off the marquee as well. Romberg, of course, also wanted to have an all-male chorus of 40 guys on the stage. The Schuberts wanted beautiful, leggy chorus girls. Lee got into an angry match with Romberg, and he growled, 40 men singing that crap? Who needs it? 20 money, that's enough, and that's final. Romberg and Donnelly had to resort to lawyers, and the sad ending stayed, and Romberg eventually got his 40-men chorus. But the troubles weren't over yet. The Schuberts, it seemed, didn't have the rights to turn Old Heidelberg into a musical. Negotiations with the play's author and his agent went on in Berlin right up until the week before the Broadway opening. But the response of the critics and the audiences was rapturous. And the Student Prince, which had such memorable songs as Golden Days, Deep in My Heart, Dear, Serenade, and of course the famous drinking song, eventually went on to become a 608 performance hit and an absolute operetta classic. While the show was running, the Schuberts sent out 14 companies to tour the country. Unheard of today. Just unheard of. Many critics regard it as Romberg's masterpiece, but the Student Prince fights had really left a bitter aftertaste for Romberg. And he actually said in print, it's not only the critics who condemn a production, often it's the producers themselves. You might be surprised to know that the Student Prince which has become such a huge financial hit, was originally damned by its producers. And it wasn't until we opened in Philadelphia and the audience applauded so enthusiastically that the producers realized that they had a hit on their hands. Then there, of course, was the success of the Desert Song, which had a real cornucopia of hits, which included the riff song, One Lone, which we heard earlier, and of course the title song as well. Oscar Hammerstein and Otto Harbach were the librettists and lyricists for the show. And as had happened in the Blue Paradise earlier, the leading soprano was let go. And who came to the rescue? Well, once again, the great Vivian Siegel stepped in and saved the show. But the show didn't really get the best of reviews. The critic, Richard Watts, began his review by asking, "So how simple-minded can the book of a musical comedy be?" And his answer was, "No end." Still, the audiences ate up the show's Rudolph Valentino chic plot and Romberg's gorgeous melodies, and they wound up making Desert Song a 471 performance hit. The New Moon, the third masterpiece, was also a mess out of town. Things were so bad and the audience is so indifferent to the producers that the producers decided to close the production down. But Sigmund Romberg and Oscar Hammerstein were determined to keep the show running and to make it a hit. They also had one hit tune already out there, which was Stout-Hearted Men. And then they added 4 more hit tunes. Lover Come Back to Me, Softly as in a Morning Sunrise, One Kiss, and Wanting You. Hammerstein had slaved for weeks over the lyrics for Lover Come Back to Me. He proudly showed it to Romberg, who simply said, "Yes, it fits." In the end, Hammerstein realized that from Romberg, who always wrote the music first, this probably was the highest praise he was going to get. But there's another story about Romberg and lyrics, which is also very entertaining. This one takes place at a gin game, where he and Jerome Kern were partners. When Romberg couldn't figure out how many trumps Kern had, Kern began to sing Romberg's hit tune, One Alone. Romberg didn't get the hint. And after the hand, Kern, who took his bridge games very seriously, said, "Didn't you hear what I was whistling?" "One of my songs," Romberg said. "But which one?" Kern wanted to know. Romberg looked at him and said, "Who knows from lyrics?" The New Moon finally came to New York, and it became a smash hit, 509 performances. Now, like many other composers of this era, Romberg went to Hollywood to work on the movies. Desert Song was filmed 3 times. There were film versions also of Maytime, The New Moon, and Student Prince. His scores, unfortunately, were often truncated and the plots were changed. The film, Deep in My Heart, which is actually a biography of Sigmund Romberg, it starred Jose Ferrer as Romberg and Merle Oberon as Dorothy Donnelly. As for the truth, well, the film is absolutely ludicrous. There's not a grain of truth in the story. But it had terrific musical numbers performed by an all-star cast, which included Jane Powell, Sig Charisse, Ann Miller, Howard Keel, Rosemary Clooney, and it had Gene Kelly's only on-screen appearance with his brother Fred. Now, Romberg, or Rami, as his friends called him, was famous for mangling the English language. Oscar Hammerstein called these Ramiisms. Once, after a bridge game in which he and Kern had soundly defeated their opponents, Romberg proudly declaimed, "We won our shirts." He was also not above borrowing melodies from other composers. Once, the great lyricist Larry Hart remarked to his partner Richard Rodgers as they were listening to Romberg playing Tchaikovsky in the next hotel suite, "Listen, Rami's working on a new score." Romney's career, which hadn't had a new success for nearly 20 years, was rounded out by a final one up in Central Park. Now, this show cashed in on the nostalgia for the Currier and Ives era. It told the story of Boss Tweed's Central Park project and the corruption that was entailed in creating the park. It was an unusual production for its producer, Michael Todd, who was legendary for gambling and romantic entanglements. Like the character out of Damon Runyon, Mike Todd was one of those men who really gave the 1940s Broadway scene much of its flamboyance and its glamour. He thought nothing of going around to the box office where he had a show playing, demanding the day's take, and then going out to a racetrack where he would lose all the money in one afternoon. Todd's shows usually featured low comics, scantily clad chorus girls, and of course Gypsy Rose Lee, who for a time was Todd's main squeeze. But today, he's remembered, if at all, for his marriage to Elizabeth Taylor, which ended sadly with his death in a plane crash shortly after they were married. And movie buffs may also remember him for his Academy Award-winning film, Around the World in 80 Days. But Todd managed to mangle a real deal out of the Shuberts for the New Century Theater, which was a white elephant that sat across from Central Park where the Century Apartments stand today at 61st Street. Lee Shubert let Todd have the theater for 2 times less than it would have cost for him to rent a playhouse in the theater district. Of course, there was a catch. And with the Shuberts, there always was a catch. Todd had to personally guarantee Mr. Lee a number of fixed weeks' rental. It was a real gamble, and the show had to be a hit. But Todd felt that the location across from Central Park would actually help a show that had Central Park in its title. Now, out of town, here in Philadelphia, the premiere performance was a benefit. Tickets went for the steep price of $50. Wives dragged their unhappy husbands who really wanted to see leggy girls and low jokes. But the general charm and nostalgia of up in Central Park really wasn't what they were looking for. The audience sat on its hands all night, and Todd got a bit nervous about whether or not the show was going to be a hit in New York. But we're talking about one of the really great showmen. And for the Broadway opening, he really pulled out all of the stops. He rented every horse-drawn carriage in the city. He took out all the critics, press, and cast in the Tavern on the Green, where there were 2 dance orchestras and 127 cases of champagne, for a party that lasted all night. One observer said Todd even managed to get it to snow. Up in Central Park, became a great success. Ran for 504 performances. So, though Sigmund Romberg may not be as well known as his contemporaries, Richard Rodgers and George Gershwin, or even Irving Berlin and Jerome Kern, Romberg has left us with an incredible catalog of songs. When he died on November 10, 1951, he was 64. And every now and then, someone adventurous does one of his old shows, usually with a lot of success, proving, as we hope this afternoon does, that there's still life in old Rami yet.